I recognize that for me to actually be a good leader to my team, I have to be a good human. And the only way I can be a good human is if I'm actually taking care of myself and really looking at all three pillars of wellness. So I try to model that, because then I want my team to feel that in the work environment with me, they are safe to be a human being, and that means taking into account their wellness as well. So we really prioritize that above everything else.
So welcome back to The Peaks Life. You're with Mike Warren and Lynn Fernie. We have a very special guest today, Flic Manning from Corethentic. So welcome, Flic. First of all, great to see you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited about this.
Excellent. And so the viewers would have seen the bio in the episode today, and there's links to your website. But before we kick off, Flic, let's just take us on a bit of a journey from where you start. You've got a fascinating journey with some real sort of big milestones and bumps on the way. So walk us through where you've come from and what you're doing today and what your current mission is.
Sure. Look, I'll try and condense it down. Like you said, I've had a few bumps along the way. Definitely don't have a linear journey. So I'll try and kind of condense it. So I started out in dance, was sort of my first foray into anything to do with the human body and mind. And that was a huge passion point. When I was around 13 years old, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, which is called Crohn's disease. And a whole bunch of mental health issues sort of spiraled on top of that. And from kind of falling into a big, deep, dark hole for quite a number of years, and really dealing with invisible illness and the stigma and everything that comes along with that, I worked out that I was going to have to find some answers for myself as to how I was going to be able to have a quality of life and thrive. And I wanted to keep dancing. I didn't want anyone to take that away from me. So I sort of had to do a lot of research, and I ended up just kind of falling in love with the human body and the human mind as a result of that. So it's sort of what started out as me wanting to just be well enough to be able to be a dancer turned into just this absolute curiosity and fascination for the human form. And it was like a rabbit hole that I want to stay going down. I just love it. There's nothing about it that doesn't excite me, and ended up sort of becoming a wellness coach and a personal trainer, a group fitness instructor, a neuroplastician, holistic pain facilitator. I do lots of advocacy work for people with invisible illness like myself. So I'm a Living Fearless ambassador for Crohn's and Colitis Australia now. And I've done music videos and stage shows, and I've been a choreographer, and ultimately I stumbled my way forward and found this sort of wellness system that allowed me to actually kind of thrive against all of the odds, all the things that were stacked against me, and realized there wasn't really much out on the market for people like myself who sometimes can't get to the gym because of what they're facing. And so I launched Corethentic. And along the way, I've done the Silicon Valley route and lived in the US for a few years and all this craziness. And now I'm very, very privileged to say that I have a book coming out this year via Indigo River in USA, who have sort of picked up on my wellness story. And we're putting together this sort of wellness memoir / manual for people to look at a new and maybe a little bit more holistic approach to taking on life with a lot of challenges and trying to actually make the best out of it. So that's probably the best I can summarize my story.
That was great. It's a very long journey.
It is a very long 30-year journey. So yeah.
Yeah. So Flic, really interested in some of your journey, particularly, when you were first diagnosed with Crohn's and some of the challenges. Can you, for those that don't know, can you tell us just a bit about Crohn's, the daily challenges that you face, and what that was like, as a teenager? Sure.
So yeah, I should absolutely explain that. A lot of people don't know what Crohn's disease is. It falls under the category of inflammatory bowel disease. So a lot of people have heard of things like colitis or celiac disease, things like that. It's in that same family of diseases alongside irritable bowel syndrome. However, Crohn's is autoimmune. So in other words, my body will actually attack me thinking that I am the thing it needs to fight off. So there's a whole range of different symptoms and things that go along with it, none of which are pleasant or love to be talked about. It's lots of vomiting and diarrhea and constipation and a lot of pain, a lot of immune system flare-ups where you just get incredibly ill, drop weight dramatically. We're talking 5 to 10 kilos in a couple of days. You can be hospitalized very easily. A lot of people with Crohn's also have a range of extra intestinal issues, which don't often get talked about. I'm one of those people. So everything from my hair to my eyes to my skin my joints, my muscles, everything gets affected by the disease. So I actually live with chronic pain. So there is not a single day of my life where I am not in some level of pain. And so coming with all of that as a teenager was very, very complicated. It was very, very hard to speak about it because I didn't really have the emotional intelligence to put into words what I was experiencing. And unfortunately, like a lot of people in my position, you find yourself relegated to the outskirts of the medical industry because it is an invisible disease. You can't see it with the naked eye. And when you're a child saying that your stomach hurts and you don't want to eat things and you don't want to go to school and all that kind of stuff, it's very easy to fob all of that off as just being some sort of emotional behavior of a teenager and not actually a really severe problem. So it took a number of years to actually get to a diagnosis. And unfortunately, that led to me falling down the rabbit hole of having PTSD, OCD, anxiety and depression, which kind of came out of multiple misdiagnosis and a lot of doctors unfortunately telling me that it was actually in my head. So it sort of left me feeling very crazy for a long time, and I've had to work a very long way to pull myself back out of that. So it's a daily struggle. There's not a single day where I'm not in pain or even where my brain is not affected. So yeah, it's a complicated condition to live with.
And I think, you know, as you said there, anybody who's battling an autoimmune condition, you know, chronic disease or something that causes such extreme pain on a daily basis, quite often the medical profession, you know, come back and report it's all in your head. That's one of the most challenging things to deal with, right?
Absolutely. I think because of the level of damage that actually does to you when you're already in a very vulnerable position, you're going to the doctors because there is such a problem that you can no longer ignore it. You have no way of working it out on your own. And as we've all been raised, you think, well, the doctor's going to have the answer. They're the authority figure when it comes to everything health and well-being. And when you go to them and they're telling you, no, it's in your head. It's all in your mind and nothing more. It really undermines your self-esteem and your confidence and your belief in yourself. And quite often you're left unable to trust yourself even once you've reached a diagnosis. So the mental health damages that go along with that are not erased by receiving a diagnosis. And that's what I try to tell people. You don't get the diagnosis and then everything that came before it just goes away. The trauma stays with you. And a lot of people don't realize they actually have to get in and start looking at that trauma and realizing what that trauma has done to their brain, let alone what that mental health condition has actually contributed in their physical health.
Yeah, for sure. And Flic, when you started, once you got your diagnosis, and you know, when you got to the point where you said, you know, I'm not going to succumb to this. I'm not going to be a victim. I want to live my life. You know, I still want to do dance. What were the kind of the defining moments for you? What were the things that, you know, really perhaps big discoveries or you know, things that really sort of gave you hope that you'd be able to deal with this and to get in control?
That's a great question. I don't know that there was sort of any one specific defining moment. I think it's probably a combination of things. You know, there were certainly some exceptionally low points. I know, like many other people with chronic pain and invisible illness, I have had all of the worst possible thoughts where I've considered doing all the worst possible things. And I was definitely in that phase for a very, very long time. Partially it was my family, I think. They never wavered. They were incredibly supportive, and I really am one of the lucky ones. A lot of people with invisible disease do not have a supportive family, but I did, and they were willing to look outside the box. And it was actually my dad, one of his colleagues at work, quietly came up to him when holistic health was very taboo, and sort of quietly said to him, have you thought about a naturopath? And it was all very hush-hush and quiet, and we'd done the spectrum of every specialist, and I'd been in and out of hospital and all the rest of it, and they finally booked me in. And that was sort of, for me, that was definitely a light bulb moment. It was the first time that I sat in front of somebody and said, this is what's wrong. And they actually just responded with, wow, that sounds like it's a hell of a lot for you to be dealing with. Let's see what we can do to actually help you. It was not, this is in your head or any of that stuff. It was, how can I be of assistance? So I think that gave me a little bit of hope, the combination of my parents not giving up and then finally seeing somebody outside that normal spectrum that said, hey, there is actually something here. And every session I had with the naturopath just filled that curiosity even more, because every question I had, there was an answer to. And I was so hungry for knowledge in order to try and understand what was going on with my body, because even once I got my diagnosis, it was like, here's a tablet, see ya. They didn't want anything to do with me. There was no explanation to tell me how to live with a condition like that, just this is the condition. And it was really through, naturopaths and osteopaths and all the other people I started to work with that we were unraveling what was going on with my body. And I was able to then get the confidence to start asking those questions. And from there, it was like, thank the Lord that Google exists, because I was just Dr. Google going down every rabbit hole and seeing all these courses and going, wow, I've got things going on with my brain. I need to go and study something about the brain and work it out and try and understand it. So, I think probably in answering your question, coming back to that, it really was that combination of my parents' support and seeing a naturopath for the first time that made me realise there might still be hope, and there might still be somebody willing to look at me and say, well, you're not broken. There are things that we can do, and we will work with you to actually make that happen.
So, Flic, how do you now use, because you've had this amazing journey of a tough journey where a lot of it you had to do it alone and investigate and find your way out of your rabbit hole. Yeah. And now with that experience and that confidence to be able to do it, you now work with people every day who come to you for help. Yes. And they're saying, help me, I'm unwell, whatever that looks like. What's the process you use based on your experience to take them from where they are to where they need to be? How do you do that?
The first thing I find with almost everybody that I work with, regardless of what background they come from, whatever health issues or mental health issues they are coming from, the one common thread that seems to tie all of us together when it comes to invisible illness is that lack of recognition and that lack of being seen by those that are supposed to help us. So my starting point with every person that I see is always to sit down and look them straight in the eye and say, your experience is real, it is valid, you are entitled to express what is going on with you, and I'm here to help support you to find your quality of life, whatever that looks like. And they're almost, honestly, more than 75% of the time when I say that, people start to cry.
Wow.
They just need to feel seen and to feel safe, to be able to say, this is what's wrong and I'm suffering and it's so, so hard. And I think because they know that I've had that same experience and I've traveled this whole way through and now, thrive really quite well comparatively to where I started. I think they sort of have that reassurance that I'm not just telling them things, it's not just read out of a textbook. These are all things that I've done on myself, tried on myself. I've had many, many failures. I know all the pitfalls. And so I'm sharing from that place of compassion and from true empathy. And so that's my starting point. And once you've built that rapport from people, I find that it all just comes out. And usually the first few sessions of working with people is just a massive dumping session. Some people have got, 20 years worth of trauma of dealing with the medical industry or other things that need to come to the surface. And once we have that all there, then it's a case of going, what do you want your quality of life to be, including everything that comes with the package that is you? And then how do we take what you have naturally inside and harness that to create a quality of life? Let's not put our eyes on the person next to us because they don't have the same body as you and they don't have the same experience as you. Let's work out how you can get a quality of life. And that's essentially the formula.
Interesting. And at Corethentic, is the client base predominantly women or is there men? Is there a different approach for different genders?
We have a real mixture. I found that a lot of the in-person classes and programs that we run tend to attract women, but we get a huge diversity in age. So we will quite often have classes where we've got women in their 70s also moving alongside women in their 20s, and it's such a collaborative and supportive environment. It's really quite incredible. But when it comes to things like wellness coaching or one-on-one things, I will often get a mixture between men and women or people that identify as a range of different sort of, genders at the moment. And I don't tend to change the approach very much. I'll always start in the same way. But I think probably because I've been a performer most of my life and there's a skill that comes with that in terms of sort of being a bit of a chameleon and working out how to talk to people of any background. So I think I naturally start to mould what I'm saying and maybe even just the intonation on the words that I use and things like that to suit whoever I'm actually speaking to. But the approach is always the same, and I haven't found there to be any issues with that message coming across or being received.
And the people that you work with, Flic, so for anybody out there who's tuning in right now who is either in chronic pain or dealing with a chronic condition, or perhaps not yet diagnosed, what would you say to them in terms of what's realistic and achievable in terms of their quality of life? Do you see complete reversals? Is there a 50% improvement? Where do people end up when they've worked with you for a while?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, of course, like everything, it's on a spectrum because everyone's issues are on a spectrum themselves, and depending on how consistent they are with what information you're providing and then using those tools also determines the outcome in a lot of ways. But I have found that there's always a significant improvement. If at the very least people's ability to manage the pain and certainly to manage the mental health aspects of it. It's not often a complete reversal of it because a lot of these things are incurable autoimmune conditions, so you're not necessarily winding back the clock entirely. But I've seen a lot of people go much in the same way that I have, from every day is agonizing, can't get out of bed, cannot function, can't keep a job, just terrible. Everything about it is terrible. And then them getting to the point where they're maybe only having half a dozen days in a month that are like that, which for somebody in that condition is like a night and day difference. It's giving complete, choice to actually have a life again. And a lot of it really, I try to approach things with people as it's not about a cure, it's about management. Because when we set things up as a cure, we tend to look at fast Band-Aid type fixes. And I'm sort of saying to people, a big part of this is actually getting to know the machine that you have, which is going to be different to mine and different to the person next to you. And that's a process of discovery. And it sometimes needs to be taken from an approach of love and curiosity. And when you're already down the deep rabbit hole of self-loathing and feeling resentful towards your body and all those things that can come with that territory of chronic pain or trauma, you've got to rebuild all of that trust and everything about your body before you can even really get in and do the work. So it is quite a process, but I haven't had a single client, touch wood, come back to me and say, things have gotten worse, or this was the worst thing I've ever done, or I don't know why I tried this. Every one of them has reported positive improvements in their overall quality of life. And the most beautiful part is they go out and share the things with the next person. And that's the beauty of wellness, is it just keeps paying itself forward. So I know with one person, it's then affecting their family and so on. It's just this beautiful ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, when people have been dealing with conditions for 20 or more years and they're at the point of absolute despair, then any improvement is a good thing, because it's giving them that slightly better quality of life. And if you can get a significant improvement, then absolutely amazing, fantastic. So Flic, I'm curious whether, with all the people that you see and the range of conditions that you deal with, do you find that there are certain, key elements to your program that kind of, there's a common theme that work every time? Is it sort of 50% is common to most conditions, or is everybody absolutely unique and every condition so unique that it's a different approach for every person?
I think the only thing that I've ever had to kind of modify and adjust as we go is when we're looking at the movement aspect of the wellness spectrum. I always talk to people about wellness being the alignment of the physical, mental, and emotional. So I think of them as three separate pillars, each which require steps to be taken. And we achieve our quality of life or our quality of wellness when we are working to actively nurture and create some sort of system that allows us to tick each of those pillars off on a regular basis. And it's only then that we actually see a quality of life. If we leave any of those pillars off, still not going to work, because everything is connected within the mind and body. So we've got to be working all of it. So I've found that from a mental health and an emotional health point of view, there's always something that will move the needle, whether it's a particular type of meditation or a breathing exercise, like a vagus nerve breathing exercise, for example, to reduce pain. or a particular type of mantra technique in order to overcome brain fog and to help us to rebuild those patterns of thought. Those things always seem to work. There's always something in those buckets that will work no matter what, and those tend to work the quickest. So they have almost an immediate effect on changing somebody's ability to tolerate pain, to improve their immune system, those kinds of things. But when it comes to the movement side, we have people that come with spinal injuries, or people that are coming with, discs that are bulging, and, bones that are wearing away in certain areas. So it becomes a case of having to really use all the tools at your disposal to look at them and say, well, maybe we need to start with stretching. And maybe we need to start really small, like 1 minute of stretching or 5 minutes of stretching, and actually design something very specific for that person, and then build up over time towards something that's a little bit more, cardio focused and things like that. So that's the only area of it that really needs specific tweaking, I think, from person to person, because what's going on inside each person's body is very, very unique to the individual.
Mm. So, Flic, how tough is your love? Because we obviously work with people who a little bit different. They may not have a health condition that they're bringing to the table. They may be at that stage where they're potentially going to get a health condition. They're potentially going to melt down. They're potentially going to burn out. They're at that cusp of looking at, I need to improve my wellness. They haven't quite made that step of walking in the door and saying, help.
Yeah.
So if you had someone in that sort of stage where they didn't have an obvious condition, but they were on the road to breaking down, falling down, how tough is the love that you'd give them? How would you sort of make sure that they sort of stood up and became aware that the journey they're on is only going to lead to disaster?
Well, I tend to find that the easiest way to approach that is through sharing personal stories. So I share obviously my background and what I've experienced, and the many, many times that I've found these discoveries and then fifth-faffed about using them and put them back down and decided, no, I want to be like everybody else and sort of stick my head in the sand and pretend none of this is happening to me. And I will tell them very openly about the many incredibly embarrassing, disastrous, awful things that have ended up happening to me as a result of making those decisions. So I live very raw and open on purpose. And that tends to help people to kind of go, oh, whoa, I do not want to be in the same position to go through that. Or there are a number of different clients that I work with who are very comfortable having their stories shared as an example, obviously not with their names or anything, but the things that they've gone through. So I'm able to actually show people, well, this is the kind of stuff that you may end up actually experiencing. And I just try to sort of make it from a place of, hey, look, I've been there too, and I know right now you are probably in the stages of grief, which is something that I refer to a lot as well. When you have a physical thing or a mental thing going on, or you're not quite sure if you do, but it's feeling like there's a sense of having to grieve the person that you were and the person you thought you were going to be. And so you've got those 5 stages of grief. Acceptance is the last one, and I don't think that's a coincidence. We have to work through the rest of it to get to acceptance. And quite often people are not at acceptance when we're having these conversations. They're in one of the previous stages of grieving. And so I talk them through that as well and say, look, it's fine. If you're in the denial stage, I've been there, absolutely had my head in the sand, 100% totally get it. And I just try and talk them through those sort of aspects of it so that they at least walk away and have food for thought. You plant the seed, You do it with love, you do it with kindness, you do it through being open and sharing, and just say, look, when you're ready, I'm not going to pass any judgment on you. I'm not going to say, you should have come to me earlier. When you're ready, I'm here. And until that point, I also provide them with some free tools as well. I have, a meditation app and a few other things where I just to say, look, if you want to go in there and start listening and just see how you feel about it, go away, do your research on me, dig things up. That's you do you. And when you're ready, my entire team will be here to support.
Excellent.
I think that the model of grief is an interesting one, because people are probably sitting there at the moment thinking, well, where does that fit in? But as you said, if you're dealing with one of the conditions that you've seen so many times, and conditions like you've got, you can't go back. You can't go back to when you were 10, for example, before you were diagnosed with Crohn's. It's physically an impossibility at this point in time.
Yes.
And so you do have to say what you have to, as you say, get to that point where you've gone through all of those stages, and accepted the fact that that just isn't realistic. So what is a realistic goal, and what is the vision for the future? So, you know, when you're working with people, I guess that vision for the future becomes very important, because it may be quite different to the expectation when they first walk in the door, right?
Oh, 100%. Usually if I was to ask in the first session for somebody to say to me in a sentence what their vision of wellness is for their life, or what their version of quality of life is, it will come out sounding like probably the most stereotypical, you know, I just want to be happy, I don't want to feel any pain, I want to have a good job, I want to be in a good relationship, I want my kids to be healthy. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Those are all totally normal things to have. But when we look at things like that, I often try and sort of break them down and go, okay, well, is it realistic to be happy all the time? No, because it's not life. That's not true life. Life is not happy all the time. We do have moments of darkness and sadness, and those are actually what help us to appreciate the light time. So we got to change some wording around that. And I actually will go through with them and help them to break those words down so that they can sort of go from this pie in the sky vision, which is unachievable because it's a level of perfection that doesn't actually exist, and try to bring it back into their actual reality. And I find that that also helps them to step through those stages of grief and say, well, this is this thing that we can work on once we're at acceptance. But right now we're not kind of there yet. You're still in anger and resentment and denial and feeling like your body's betrayed you and all of these kinds of things. And we need to get all of that out, and we need to surface it and talk about it and have it all out in the open so we can see it for exactly what it is and exactly what your body and mind is, and get to the process of accepting it. Then we can approach it with love and curiosity, and that's when it's going to change. So
I think another thing that a lot of people with autoimmune conditions or chronic conditions, chronic pain that affects their daily life, another thing that they often have to deal with, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is the judgment that other people make. So they judge themselves, you know, and they get angry and they get resentful and bitter, but they also get judgments from other people who don't realize what they're actually dealing with.
yeah.
And all they see is the, you know, the outward effects, perhaps the ability to hold down a job, or struggling during the day with, you know, with tiredness and fatigue because they haven't slept all night. How do you manage that with the people that you work with?
From the perspective of how they're dealing with it, or how I'm dealing with it, they're dealing with it. I always sort of say to them, well, you know, first of all, if you've got an autoimmune disease, you've got an invisible illness, you've got chronic pain, it's likely that you're dealing with a stigmatized condition. Not only are a lot of these conditions actually stigmatized in the medical industry, which is the starting point of a lot of the mental health that does go with it, but they're stigmatized and completely not catered for in the real world. You know, and this is part of the reason why I started my own business. It's not catered for in most of the gyms or personal training studios. It's not catered for even by a lot of, you know, your physios and your chiropractors and different bits and pieces, and certainly most jobs. I mean, I've had jobs taken away from me. I've been refused promotions at jobs once they found out that I do have an invisible illness because you considered a risk. So there's a lot of these sort of things that people are having to go through all of the, you know, and navigate all of the time, and it is very, very complicated. For me, I think I just, again, try and say to them, look, at some point you will find that you're just done. You're just fed up with having to pretend to be okay, having to placate somebody else to kind of, I say it's in order to preserve their imagined view of the world, because it is an imagined view of the world where no one else is going through anything but you, and, you know, you just want everyone to show up and do their job and be perfect and all the rest of it. And at some point you're going to have to draw a line in for the sand for yourself and say, what am I willing to put up with? What am I willing to tolerate? And what I've found most common is that when people are having to act fine or pretend or not talk about their condition in order to try and keep a job or in order to try and navigate a relationship, that becomes so toxic from a mental health perspective that it actually makes their physical condition significantly worse, tends to make the pain higher, the flare-ups more often. And so at some point you just kind of go, I'm going to start to voice the unspoken and own it and be the face of it and be prepared to answer people's questions. You know, people will ask me all the time, well, what's Crohn's disease and what's this? And I'm talking about all of the most vulnerable experiences of my life. But through that, I am actually so much more confident and so much more powerful. And it has allowed me to build a world around myself that makes room for the condition that I have. When I didn't do that, there was no room for it at all. And so I try to encourage people as they come to a place of acceptance in it themselves to take those small steps, starting with family and friends and then colleagues if they feel comfortable, but stepping into it and taking ownership of it, because that actually makes their health better rather than worse. So I try to frame it from that perspective.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, if you're trying to hide something, you're trying to put up that mask that everything's okay, but behind the scenes things are not okay. That's super stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real mental stress. It's an emotional stress as well, and it's probably a physical stress. So you're getting a triple whammy, and then you're already dealing with this condition, which in itself is bad enough. So it makes a lot of sense that stress is going to make the condition worse. So I think that, people are very concerned and frightened and worried about talking about it. But until we get that conversation going, the people around them are not going to understand either. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to help that person. But once you start to talk about it, then people can become part of that support network. And often the response is pretty surprising, because it's more positive than you perhaps expect.
Yes, especially these days, some things have changed for the better, which is great. And we're seeing this in more workplaces now, more, wellness programs and mental health programs and things like that taking effect. And there are a lot more people starting to get training around how to speak to somebody that has an invisible illness, which includes, of course, mental health as well, or someone that's dealing with pain, and trying to make the environment more open for them. And I have been very privileged and very lucky enough to sort of be involved in guiding some people to have conversations within the workplace that have started a conversation with the entire organisation about, can you define what an invisible illness is? Do you understand what is different between tiredness and fatigue? Because what they're going through in terms of fatigue is very different to, I've had a really long day and I'm so tired I could go to sleep. It's a completely different spectrum. And quite often then people are inspired to then go home and say, hey, have you ever heard of invisible illness? And people are starting to ask questions. And really that's where change comes from. It's from person to person. It's from someone being willing to actually ask the question. And I try to say to people that are not in that invisible illness category, it is a privileged position you're in. You have the privilege of being visible and being able to just do things without having to think about it. And it is partially your responsibility to help enable the rest of us to be visible, because we're not actually invisible. You can see me right now on the camera, but society places us in a box and relegates us to the sidelines. And until we have people in that box starting to come forward and say, I will not be in the box anymore, I'm going to have the conversation, and people on the other side then also saying, hey, have you heard of this thing? That's where change comes from. And I'm starting to see it happen in the workplace, and that's a really good sign, because that's where people spend most of their day. It has to kind of start there.
Yeah. So Flic, each day you obviously give a huge amount of passion and love and support to your clients. Flip the coin the other way. What do you do for your own wellness when you run the business, you look after your client base, you've got an incredible workload? Mm-hmm. How do you care for yourself? What are some of the wellness tips that you do personally that you might be able to pass on?
Sure. So I've purposely come into my business structuring it probably very differently to most people's businesses, in that I knew it would be unrealistic for me to try and build the model as a traditional 7 days a week, 24 hours a day type model. And when I worked in Silicon Valley, and so I saw startups from the ground up, I went into that pressure cooker environment, and I saw just how quickly it becomes a burnout situation for most people. And I realized, well, I can't do that. I can't afford to do that with an autoimmune disease. So coming into it, I purposely live as though, to some extent, like I'm semi-retired, which sounds kind of funny for someone with a business that's growing, but my day will purposely have non-negotiables in it, and my team knows about this as well. So rather than going from meeting to meeting or client to client, I have time scheduled in my day for meditation, for mantra, for stretching, for exercise, to take a nap if I need to go for a walk. I do as many of my meetings and things moving, so I'll do a lot of them when I'm walking around, because I know that contributes to me having better access to my cognitive function, which is one of the areas that I do get affected by. So I get really bad brain fog, which for most people that haven't heard of it, it's kind of like being under the influence of alcohol, except without any of the fun bits. You lose your spatial awareness and things are a bit weird, but you're not happy. So I try to kind of put those things at the forefront. I recognize that for me to actually be a good leader to my team, I have to be a good human. And the only way I can be a good human is if I'm actually taking care of myself and really looking at all three pillars of the wellness. So I try to model that, because then I want my team to feel that in the work environment with me, they are safe to be a human being, and that means taking into account their wellness as well. So we really prioritize that above everything else. And I'm not one of these people that will move something if someone says, hey, I really need to do this lunch meeting. It's not going to happen, because lunch is my time and I'm not on my phone, I'm not on a computer, I'm not on a device. It's just me breathing and eating my meal. So I preserve and protect fiercely my well-being time. And I honestly feel like I've achieved significantly more running my business that way, with the priority being on my well-being and my staff's well-being, than in any other model that I could have taken on. And that really allows me to do things that I shouldn't be allowed to do. That's what I'm in disease.
That's cool. So where to from here? Because I'm kind of, you said the business is growing. What's the next steps? What's the plans for the future for yourself and the business?
Sure. I want to move even more into the virtual fitness space. So I do have some online programs and things now that are sort of catered to everybody, because really the system works on anybody, regardless of whether you have chronic pain or not. It's just going to obviously shift the needle in a dramatic way if you've got, chronic pain or invisible illness. But I want to provide even more tools and get a little bit more specialized as well. So create programs for specific types of conditions, and have that all online, because again, most of us actually can't commit to getting to a gym or doing something along those lines, because we don't know when we're going to have a flare up. So I try to make the tools available. My meditation podcast is growing, which is amazing. And I'm going to start to be bringing on some guests from around the world who have really big, sort of powerful movements of meditation and mindfulness themselves. So start to bring in their tools as well as my own. And on top of that, I'm just going to get out and continue to do a lot more public speaking, a lot more advocacy. I've got the book coming out as well, of course, which will be launching this year. So there's going to be a lot of stuff around that in particular. But I'm seeing my team grow, which is amazing. And, seeing them step up and continuing to grow and becoming even more interested in the skills that we actually teach, and going off and studying the brain and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So I have no doubt that there are even more tools coming, and there's a few things that I can't really talk about, but they are definitely coming, little things that are on their way. But yeah, we're digging down even deeper and trying to create a lot more tools for people to use that are really easy to access and very simple to actually sustain, because if it's not sustainable, it's not useful.
That's cool. So Flic, before we wrap up, I just want to draw a couple of parallels. A lot of our listeners and the people who are watching sit in the professional or executive space, and they may not be, as Mike said earlier, they may not be dealing with any kind of chronic disease. They may not have any invisible illness, but perhaps their health has deteriorated because they don't prioritize their health. I think there's so many parallels from what you talked about with your own personal experience, that you've structured your business to make sure that first and foremost you are well, and then as a well person, or the most well that you can be, you can then lead your team and lead your business. And I think that holds true for anybody, whether you're dealing with any kind of illness, or if you're perfectly healthy, then it's a little bit like being the aircraft. Put your own oxygen mask on before you help others. I think structuring your life to put the wellness aspects first, whether it is the meditation, whether it's the diet, whether it's the movement, but making sure those are in there, and then you can be the best person that you can possibly be, and you can give the absolute most to your friends, your family, your team, and your business. I think there's an enormous parallel there, and there's a real strong message for everybody. Put yourself first, and everything else will fall into place. And you'll find you can achieve so much more than if you only put the career, the business, and the team first.
Absolutely. I mean, even just from a productivity and time-saving point of view, it's really shifted everything for me, because when you are in a position where you know that you are as well as you possibly can be, and you've got a whole bunch of tools in your tool belt to actually help you cope with the stresses that are naturally going to come your way if you are a CEO or a manager or anyone kind of in a business or like major industry, if you've got those things in place, you're not only taking care of yourself, but you're allowing your brain to do its job at full capacity, and you're doing it with less emotional bias, which means you're making better judgment calls, you're making better decisions, and you're thinking more clearly about where you want to go. And I think that really ends up saving you time and actually money, because you're not fixing mistakes that would have been prevented had you actually just been in a position to think through it clearly in the first place. You're not trying to get a bazillion things done at the same time. There's room for everything. And that always sounds very counterintuitive at the beginning, because when you say, oh, you should try and do these things, everyone goes, oh, I don't have time to do any of that. And I'm like, you've got to kind of flip it on its head and say, if I'm doing all of these things, I actually have more time, not less time. It will feel a bit weird for the first week or so as you try and add these tools in, for sure. But once you start to really restructure things for you to be truly a leader, and I really think true leadership comes from being an example, a true example, and making sure that your team understands that their humanness has a role to play in the company. That's partially what you hired them for, and you have a responsibility as a leader to create an environment that really allows them to bring out the best of themselves. And they're just not going to do that. As mammals, we change our behavior through mirroring, and if we don't feel safe, seen, valued and heard, we retract and hold the best of us, and it puts us in a precarious health position. So often you will see teams that are not working well. It's because a leader has not actually shown an environment or created a community where the team is safe to actually be who they are and have their humanness recognized. I think when you put it at the top and everyone else starts to put it at the top, everything falls into place. And I've seen that within my own company, and certainly companies I go into and actually help them to look at these things themselves. So it's amazing to see how everything just starts to fall. And not people staying at the office until 9 or 10 o'clock trying to get stuff done. I'm like, guys, this is insane. This is like actually so insane. Just actually prioritize your health, and then suddenly you'll be like, wow, I got a lot done and it's 5 p.m. and I get to go home. How awesome is that?
Absolutely.
Certainly a fascinating and fresh perspective, and I think it's something that needs to be heard loud and clear through certainly through the corporate community, just to create that awareness. So, Flic, thank you. It's been an amazing chat. It's been awesome to hear your journey, and we've been honoured to listen and understand and get your insights on what you're doing and how you're helping people. All your details are obviously in the podcast if you want to contact you and get some more information. But thank you so much for your time and joining us on the Peaks Live. We really, really enjoyed our time.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I love what you are doing as well. I mean, your content is absolutely amazing, and you're touching on so many really, really important subjects. I feel truly humbled and honoured to have been brought into that fold and to even be remotely associated with what it is you're doing. And anything that is spreading good is fantastic, and you're certainly doing that. So thank you for your time as well, and for the poignant questions. I really appreciate it.